and you are going to have more fun listening to what they say. I call this our tribal history, because we've all kind of come here as a tribe from other places, and these are the people who know why we came here, how we came here, and all about it. So you're going to have a very rich time today. What I think I'm going to do is we have a few people outside, and I'm going to try to have them seated quietly. And once we get started in another couple minutes, there won't be other people seated until there's a break. So first off of that, I think you've all got a sheet that tells you about the speakers. And the first person who is going to be talking is Pat Ashurst, and she is the daughter of Ed Olson, from whom we bought the ranch. And she's going to tell you about living here on the coast and what she and her mother did, kind of what the women did. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat now.
Good morning. I don't know whether it's better to be first or last, but I had kind of a hard time coming up with something to talk about because I knew there was all these men going to talk and what they were going to talk about. So I decided that there was a couple women here too, my mother and I, who put up with all the men. And the first big shock was when we moved here from Annapolis, where my grandparents had a large house, 5 bedrooms, and my 2 uncles lived with them, and our family lived in a smaller house right next door. And my mother basically took care of my grandparents' house also. So when we moved here, my 2 uncles moved here with us because there was so much for the men to do on the ranch. And there was no electricity, for one thing. And part of my job was filling the lamps with oil every day, so we had something to see with. And I'm not quite sure how long it was after we moved that we got a generator. But I know it was a while because I hated filling those lamps. And the house was very small compared to the big house and the 2 houses that we had in Annapolis for the 6 of us. Upstairs here was like a dormitory, 4 beds, 4 dressers, I think maybe a couple chairs, nothing on the walls, 2 bedrooms downstairs where my parents stayed in one and I was in the other. Small, really small kitchen, dining room, and living room. And I tried to think about all of us, 6 of us in the living room, and I don't think there was any place for anybody else to sit but us. And so we went from 4 people in the family to 6 people in the family. And my mother, of course, had to cook on the wood stove. We had the fireplace. Somebody had to cut the wood. And we just managed that way until, as I say, we got the generator. And then PG&E came, I think maybe somebody else could correct me on this, maybe about 47 when we really got electricity. And we also had the guest house. And it had a big, long living room, so when people came and we didn't fit in our house to eat, we went over there and ate because it was a larger room. And eventually, when we did get electricity, the kitchen that was in the guest house became the laundry room. And we did our laundry in the back room of the guest house and had an old-fashioned clothesline, and that's the way it was with that kind of thing. How can I point this out? Yeah, the house just came like a foot to the house that's here, the old house. And then the guest house was further on the other side. And there was just grass. The stairs, the rock stairs that are out there was kind of in the middle of the two houses. And we had a huge vegetable garden, grew most all of the vegetables that we had to eat. We had the cows, we milked the cows. And as we grew up and got older, some of these jobs became our jobs because the men would be working late at night, especially in the wintertime when lambing time and so forth was going on. I milked cows. It was fun to squirt the milk at the cats in the barn. We had chickens. Gathered the eggs, and if the hen didn't like us and was sitting on some eggs, they would peck us, or the rooster would chase us. But with the milk, we would put it in large pans in a cooler because we didn't have a refrigerator. And one of my favorite things to do, and it just gives me shivers to think of it now, I would take vanilla wafers and dip through that thick cream on the top of those pans and eat it. And it's just, and we would skim that cream off, put it in a churn our own butter, make our own cottage cheese, and we canned everything. And my grandparents' house was down by the big barn, and it had a much larger kitchen and a back porch where it had double laundry tubs. And when we did peaches and pears and apples especially, the men would help because we would can so much that they had to help too. And it was, as I say, the kitchen was so much bigger. There was no way we could have done it in the house here. And we ate those things all winter long. We put eggs down in brine in crocks. We killed all of our own meat. Sometimes it got a little icky to eat. We ate it. And I don't think there was hardly ever a Sunday that went by that somebody didn't go fishing. And so we ate a lot of fish. And at that time of the being around here, even I could go get abalones and not get too wet. My mother and I cooked for the sheep shears, and there was generally 4 or 5 hungry fellas that had worked hard all day besides our own family. So we had to cook big meals, not just, salads. And for breakfast, we always have fruit that we canned, oatmeal, and either ham, bacon, eggs, pancakes. That was, breakfast on the wood stove. And one of the things I never learned was to pot roast abalones like our mother did. And the only place to go get anything as far as food was this little rundown store at Wallala, or McNamee's, which you see the sign for, I guess it's still there. It isn't? Yeah. Or if we needed to go to Healdsburg to the dentist or something like that, we would store up on the big things, flour, sugar, and that kind of stuff. There was always company. We always had company. People liked to come Avalonian, so they would come and they would spend the whole weekend with us. And a lot of relatives from the Bay Area would come, and people went hunting and that. And I learned to drive when I had to sit on 2 or 3 pillows because my one uncle and I did the sheep from here to the river. That was our territory, where my dad and the other uncle did the rest of the ranch as far as looking for the sheep. So, you know, the roads weren't too much then, and if you ran off of them, you weren't going to go anywhere, so I couldn't get hurt. And I loved my uncle's 32 Dodge convertible with a rumble seat. And I wish I had it now. And because of going to school, when we first came, one of the Richardson boys picked us up and took us to Wallow, where the bus picked us up. But we went to school at Seaside, which is where St. Oars is now. There was an 8th grade little school there. And one year we went back out to Oregon because the teacher drove by the house here, and so we went out that way. We went to elementary school for a couple years in Point Arena, and then high school, of course, the rest of the time. We both played basketball, and to go any place to compete, we went all day because we went to Boonville, or we went to Mendocino, sometimes Fort Bragg, Hopland sometimes. So we traveled a lot if we played ball. And of course the school was so small that everybody played most everything. And one of the things, I was never anything but a tomboy. My mother said I cried the first day that I went to school and had to wear a dress. And when I think of Seaside, I think I spent all my recesses walking picket fences. So we played games like nobody nowadays has ever heard of, like Andy Over, where you threw the ball over the schoolhouse, and Red Rover and Lemonade and a few of those things, baseball. But the playgrounds were just a field and dirt, not like they are now. I think for the toys that we had here, I don't remember us having much more than, he had a dump truck and I had a steam shovel, or vice versa, and we played in the dirt, and he had a pedal little car, and I had a little 2-wheel bike. Then we did graduate to 8-speed bikes before we left here. I had what was called a Betsy Wetsy doll. Never did play with her much. She lived in the closet most of the time. But we were busy. We had things to do. And, you know, if I wasn't helping my mother, I was with the guys. And I know Russ is going to talk about shearing sheep, but one of the things I thought of was when the fellas would sack the wool, we would think we were a big help, and we'd get in the sack and try and stomp the wool down. But as light as we were, we didn't make much progress. We didn't have, you know, a lot to do at night. We played cards. We listened to the radio. We had a little schoolwork, definitely not like kids have now. And so that was kind of how we grew up. And my mother loved flowers. And when she wasn't cooking, she was in the yard. And there's probably like camellias out here that she planted. And she had hundreds of named fuchsias at one time. She had a huge, big patch of dahlias that used to be out here. My dad loved sweet peas, so he had sweet peas planted on the fence. And there was always something in the yard to do. I kind of got out of yard work. He did most of the yard work with his mother. I would dust and clean the house. But, you know, I first started out by setting the table and learned to cook just along with my mother because somebody needed to peel those vegetables as well as cook them. And, excuse me. But when it came to shearing, we would always do the afternoon meal, the lunch meal, at my grandparents' house because that's where the shearing shed was. And so all the guys came there and had lunch. So we were busy. And one of the things in conclusion I thought of, because after I retired I started genealogy, and doing this has made me think of a lot of things. And I just want to say to everybody, we're all busy with the present. We kind of look to the future. But write down your past because your grandkids and great-grandkids are going to know what you did.
What I did not say to you ahead of time is, save any questions you may have for the end, rather than interrupting what we're doing now. So if you do have questions, just please save them for the end of the entire sessions. We're now going to listen to Russ, who, Pat's brother, who, how old were you when you moved here? How old were you when you moved here?
5.
He was 5. He moved here in 1941. And so he was 5 at that point, and Pat was older. Go ahead, Russ.
Okay, I don't know whether you can hear me or not, but I'm sure Pat and I are probably, I'll overlap some of these things that she has already said. It was said that I was 5 years old when I moved to the Sea Ranch. Yeah. We went to school at the seaside, and there were about 7 or 9 kids there, and if Pat and I didn't go to school there would have been no school. This was a one-room schoolhouse, first through the 8th grade, and some of the games we played, dodgeball, ante-over, marbles, and whatever. Pat said some of this already. Okay, we raised chickens and lambs and cows naturally, and sometimes we'd have a real wet winter or a real wet night, and some of the fields would be just covered with water. And of course, if a lamb was born and had no place to get up and stay dry, and we got there quick enough, we could bring them home and put them in the oven or put them in front of the fireplace to keep warm and then come back to life. Chickens, I don't know, we had 20 to 50 chickens probably. A lot of them were fryers, which we could eat. And chickens always laid eggs, except sometimes they'd molt in the winter time. One winter, we had to buy 2 milk cows so we could milk and feed the bummer lambs. Now, a bummer lamb is a lamb that has lost his mother. And you feed them, and you have to have bottles and nibbles, and you have wash and all that stuff. Horseback. Yeah, we rode horseback to gather the sheep. We had to bring the sheep in twice a year to shear them. Most people don't shear them twice a year, but we did. One of the reasons. The wool would get heavy and wet, and they'd lay down, and they couldn't get up. You find them with 4 feet there. It's not good. So we sheared twice a year to try to get rid of some of that. Lambs, when we sheared, we had to separate the ewes from the lambs, and the wool had to be kept separate. A good sheep shearer could shear about between 100 and 125 sheep a day. It depends on the breeds. Some sheep shear easier than others. And then after the sheep were sheared, we had to sack the wool. Now sacking the wool is a little different. You had a sack about 8 foot long, somewhere between 30 to 36 inches around, and you had a ring. You put this sack up through this ring and over, and then you put it down into something, and the weight would hold the sack from slipping. Now, you get in the wool sack and try to get out of it, 8 foot. The only way to get out of a wool sack is fill the sack up. It was kind of a sticky job, but that's the way we did it. You got in there and you stopped around the edges. You didn't stop in the middle, but around the edges. Because it would go down and the sack would kind of hold it there. Then later on, we got a hydraulic wool sacker or a press. This press had a round cylinder about the size of the sack and had 2 doors on it, so when the sack was full, you open the door and let it out. And if you put too much pressure on it, you had wool on the ground, not in the sack, so it had to be done over again. Driving, okay. We had a road off the highway, ran the river up here to the Black Point barn. Some of this road was on the old railroad tracks that used to be here. It was a long time ago. And we had 2-wheel tracks, and the bridges weren't that wide, maybe a foot or so on each side. But that's the way we learned to drive. I got my driver's license at 14, and I'm sure Pat did too. Driving at nighttime, which we didn't do, our parents did that. During World War II, you drove, or you didn't drive at all, at night with parking lights. Try driving up Highway 1 with parking lights. Not good. Okay, now we get into the military and part of World War II. We had Army boys come through here twice a day. I gotta blow my nose. Hang on. Yeah, we had Army boys come through here twice a day. We were coast observers. Every airplane, boat, anything we saw, night or day, we called in Hamilton Air Force Base, I think, right? And I think our call letters was 20able too. So when we heard the airplane, we called it in. We had the Coast Guard patrolling the Walla beach, and they had war dogs, and they had war dogs at the base up here too. Sometimes the war dogs weren't controlled by their handlers. They got loose, they killed sheep. Not good. And sometimes we're invited to movies up there at the base. We got to know some of the officers, Lieutenant Glass and Gant, and there's a guy by the name of Hooper and Shirk and Nick. And we got to know some of the guys pretty well. Okay, now we got a book here. Silent Siege. In that book, you will find that there was a Jap balloon. We spotted that Jap balloon right here. It was shot down over Castle Cooke. Nobody knew where the balloons were going to go. Some of them even ended up in the Midwest, quite a ways from Japan. Okay, that's Silent Siege. Airplanes. We lost, I say we, the government, lost airplane right off the big barn. I don't know why the pilot went in, but he went in. We found his life jacket or something and his name. And the government contacted his parents. They came out and laid a wreath. They were from North Dakota. Another airplane crash landed up here. We used to call it the sand dunes, where the bombing target used to be. And he had engine trouble, I guess, for some reason. And he decided he better set it down. I don't know whether he had his wheels down or not, but he stopped about 50 or 100 yards from going into the ocean. During the war, we found, I don't know if it was a magnetic or a contact mine, down what we used to call the Lone Tree. Where are we? About a mile south, I think.
It's kind of on the border between units 28 and 24, but it's right up next to the highway.
And then we found a bomber tire on Black Point Beach. The big single tire, almost stood about 4 or 5 foot tall, and it struck. Somebody didn't make it. Hurricanes. I don't know whether you people notice some plots, the cipher froze. There might be a hole pushed through. Yeah, we have hurricanes. Up here, across from what I call Mill Bend, got a little nose again. What we call Mill Bend, right at the beginning of the park, on the bluff there, I've seen pine trees blowing off 20 or 30 feet above the ground, just twisted off. Naturally, when you had high winds, you had fences blown down. I hated building picket fences. When I was little, old enough to hold picket up straight, somebody else could drive it. I helped, and that made 2 teams of people driving pickets. I hated it. I still do. But other than that, that's about all I have to say. Thank you, people, for being here. We'll turn it over to somebody else.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate it. Can you hear me? Better? Okay. The next person who's going to speak is Reverdy Johnson, who is the father of our CC&Rs.
Good morning. I got out of law school in 1963 and moved west. Little did I know that the firm that I joined in San Francisco would become counsel for this project. It made a lot of sense as I thought about it further, because the chairman of the board of Castle Cooke, Alex Budge, had a son, Whit Budge, and Whit Budge was a partner in the firm. And I had the good fortune to work for Whit. In the fall of 1963, he asked me if I would be prepared to work on this project. Said absolutely. Drove up the coast to look at the land just after Thanksgiving, with a sense of proprietary air already. I crossed through one of the sheep gates, ranch gates, walked out to Black Point, or Byler's Point actually, and found there was somebody already there. And I went up to this young man and I said, "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" He says, "My name's Bill Turnbull and I'm designing a building to go on here, and who the hell are you?" Well, that was the start of a friendship that lasted the rest of Bill's life. And we got in trouble together for years and years, owned a winery together. My kids, his kids grew up together. It was just a marvelous, marvelous relationship. But what I really want to talk about today is not just how I got involved in the project or drafting the restrictions and handling all of the aspects of putting a project together so that it could be sold. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the people involved. And I've got on the wall photographs of some, but not all, of the people from the early days. There's a truism in farming that the farmer loses money every year, but he makes it up when he sells. Now, Susan's absolutely grand book on the ranch makes this very clear. Del Mar Ranch had a continuing history of bankruptcies, foreclosures, and new owners. And the last new owners, starting in 1941, out of the bankruptcy of Frick, were the Ohlson family. Oceanic purchased the property from the Ohlsons, and Emmett will talk more on how that occurred. In a contract in 1962, it closed 2 years later in 1964. The task of taking a 5,200-acre sheep ranch and converting it into a real estate development for all of us here was a daunting task for sure. There was one person who had the vision to pull it off, and that was Al Boeke. He was an extraordinary individual because he had the capacity to assemble a bunch of people who had the talent that he was looking for, and then largely step back and let them take their own lead and provide guidance as necessary only to accomplish the goal that he saw. He was based in Hawaii, but he was over here as necessary, and he was able to be successful because he had the support of everybody in Hawaii, in Oceanic, Castle Cooke. Fred Simpich was his boss, who was president of Oceanic. He supported him all the way down the line. Whenever there was or at the times that we had hiccups in this project, it only occurred because we had a loss of continuity in that support in Honolulu. And the times when we had project managers here who did not understand the history that they were working with occurred because things had changed in Honolulu. But by and large, Oceanic stood behind this project and made it work, and without their ongoing support, it simply wouldn't have happened. Al had known a fellow in Los Angeles who was a builder by the name of Ned Westover. He got hold of Ned to bring him up here to be in the first person in charge of physical plant, to be able to work with the engineers and contractors in getting the project off the ground. Now, Ned was a small man, gentle in appearance, but steel in execution. The fact that he was married to a WAC officer was evidence of the steel in his character. Ned guided the construction of the lodge, the Esherick demo houses, Condo 1, subdivision improvements in the early years. In Los Angeles, he had known a very, very good young contractor by the name of Matt Sylvia. And he convinced Matt to come up and join him here on the coast. Now, I don't have any photographs of Ned. Actually, if I had in my wildest dreams anticipated that we would be here 50 years later, I would have done a lot more photography in the early years. But I have photographs of Al and a whole bunch of photographs of Matt, who became one of my dearest friends. Matt grew up in the area around Fall River in Massachusetts, out of a Portuguese fishing family. He left home when he was a teenager, went to Florida, worked on a couple of dairy farms there. When the Korean War broke out, he lied about his age, joined the Navy, and spent the Korean War in the Navy, returned to be discharged in Long Beach, and his father's brother, Uncle George, was a builder with a small contracting business in the Los Angeles area. Matt went to work for George. George taught him how to build, and he became the builder of choice of architects who were probably some of the more difficult people to work with in terms of the precision that they required in their work. Matt worked for Richard Neutra, and he was the only contractor, as I understand this, that Neutra ever could find who could build a building where there was an angle of glass butted with two pieces of glass butted each other, and there was nothing else, just that glass butted. But Matt could build that. Ned brought him up here. He took to this landscape immediately. He had a wife and 3 kids. They came up, very small kids at the time. And he was never happier than when he was in tough weather, way up on a building, hanging on, or when the water was calm and he was out in a boat fishing for salmon, or when he was having a glorious time down at the lodge with his buddies. You will see photographs over there of Matt's 50th birthday in 1982. In one of those photographs, you will see Matt in coveralls with the Sea Ranch Fire Department name on it. Well, he didn't start that way at the party, but he ended up that way. Because Jay Baker and a number of the other characters were pretty tough hombres. decided that Matt needed to be totally immersed in the river for his birthday. Matt fought like a tiger, but he ended up getting very wet. Somebody went into his truck and pulled out a set of coveralls for the fire department, and Matt changed into the coveralls for the rest of the party. There was one story about Matt. There are thousands of them, but I will leave you with one that is the stuff of which legends are made, but I was there, and I can testify to what other people consider to be part of the mythology of the Sea Ranch. But it occurred in the very early days, probably, it was Labor Day, probably 1965. The lodge was built. It was the one place that everybody gathered. We were all down there for, it was on Saturday night of Labor Day weekend. And it was getting dark. Telephone call, I guess a radio call came up from the sheriff at Jenner. And he had encountered a entourage of Hell's Angels who were heading up the coast, and their destination was the Sea Ranch, where they were going to camp for the weekend. Well, at the time, the Hell's Angels, at that time, the Hell's Angels were largely very, very aggressive, tough guys that just didn't fool around. They became a little bit, as they grew older, you only had to have gray hair and a mustache, any facial hair, to be a Hell's Angel and a Harley. But at the earlier time, these guys were really tough. Well, the word got out to all of us at the lodge that we might have an encounter with the Hell's Angels or a visit from them. Matt went to his abode, Jay Baker to his abode, somebody else went elsewhere. They all came back with rifles, carbines, shotguns, and they were doled out to every man down there at the lodge. So we were ready. Sooner or later, we saw looking up at the road, a line of lights started passing by. But there was a gap. We couldn't understand really why there was a gap between the lights. You know, motorcycles, when they're next to each other, you get a couple of lights, they're very tight. Well, we subsequently discovered that the modus operandi for traveling of the Hell's Angels was to have one bike dark and one bike with lights on, so that you never knew on the road how many there were. The sheriff followed them and escorted them all the way up to the Wallala River Bridge. And then he turned around. He said, I've done my job, I got them out of here, and they're in Mendocino County, and whatever they were there, that's fine. He came back down to the lodge, and everything was dark down there. All the lights were off. There was no indication that the lodge even existed. But we were standing in the parking lot. Sheriff drove in, his lights picked up all this gunmetal that was and he got out and he said, wow, you guys mean business. I told the guys down in Jenner, said, you don't want to stop at the Sea Ranch because they shoot first and ask questions later. So you guys really mean it. Matt was a great teacher, and to his credit, many, because he was the only contractor here, many of the fellows who became contractors themselves learned their craft under Matt. Matt never begrudged the fact that he was teaching his future competition. He was so big a man in terms of his spirit that he wanted everybody to be able to share what he had. There were a few people like him. The one of the other people I do not have a photograph for was Marion Conrad, a name that probably would mean very little to most people here. Marion was one of the best PR women that was in the business, and she was assigned the task of figuring out how to promote this project when it was nothing but a sheep ranch. She divined that this was properly a Pebble Beach North. The opening of the ranch for being able to take reservations occurred we didn't start selling property until the summer of '65, but we had an opening in March or April in '65. Marion Conrad put on the opening picnic down below where the lodge is now, down by the old barn down there, and bussed up the beautiful people. The picnic tables were set out by the bluff, catered luncheon served, and it blew off the tables. That was the end of the beautiful people. But I have to be more generous to Marion. She created, through her contacts with the national press, Shelter magazines, Life, Look, Sports Illustrated, she created an image of the Sea Ranch that we've all lived up to. And that was an image of a project that was driven by its environment and not to abuse that environment. And if you go back to the early photographs of this project, they told that story, and it has remained true. Thank you.
Thanks, Reverdy. What Reverdy did not say, which I think is an interesting sideline, is that he and Emmett, who was sitting next to him, were only 25 and 27 years old when they were doing this. And when you think about trusting a project like this to a 25-year-old and a 27-year-old, it's quite a thought. Now we're going to hear from Emmett DeMoss, who was the first project manager and really got this whole thing going.
You got to be fair. It's 27 and 28.
Susan, thank you very much. Can you all hear me out there? No. Now can you?
Think of that.
How about now? Yeah. Susan, thank you very much. And to the audience, thank you very much for showing up to hear the old stories from a bunch of old people. My saga with the Sea Ranch started in the spring of '63. I was a graduate student down at Stanford at the business school, and spring break was coming up, and I felt that I deserved some kind of a vacation. And back in '58, I had graduated undergraduate from an Eastern school with an engineering degree, and immediately got my commission in the Marine Corps, and immediately signed on for an extra year to go to flight school down in Pensacola, Florida. So I was shipped to California. I was an East Coast boy, and shipped to California in 1959 and stationed at Camp Pendleton, where there was 20 pilots and 20,000 ground pounders. And I fought the Battle of Laguna Beach, and it was a draw. But after the Marine Corps, and during that time, I was flying all over California. I was out in the desert, landing on dry lake beds and dirt roads. I was flying out of Sonora Pass in the Sierra Mountains in the wintertime. And I was flying up and down the coast. And I really fell in love with the state, and particularly the coast, just because it was absolutely so beautiful. So then at the spring break in 1963, I was flying in the reserves out of Alameda. I was a resident assistant at a fraternity where I was getting my room and board. I was borrowing my tuition. I was making my gas money by flying on the weekends for the military. And again, I was flying up and down the coast. So I went up to Alameda, found a pilot flying to Honolulu, and they asked if I could jump aboard, and he said, yeah. Put on my uniform, and I flew to Honolulu, immediately took it off, and started surfing in Waikiki. Staying at Fort DeRussy, which for $1 a day, and I allowed myself another $1.50 for pineapple to eat, because I didn't have any money. Long story short, I started getting a little nervous because I was going to be graduating in 2 or 3 months, and I didn't have a job. Although I thought I would get a pretty good job offer from Bell Helicopter down in Fort Worth, which I did. But I picked up in the 5 annual reports for the Big Five in Honolulu at that time, which was Seabrewer, Dillingham, Castle Cooke, I forget, Alexander and Baldwin, George H. Davies. So, thank you, Ray. So I read these reports, and in the Castle Cooke report, it showed that a division of Castle Cooke had been formed called Oceanic Properties to manage their land holdings, which encompassed macadamia farms, pineapple farms, even cemeteries, etc., out in the Philippines. So I was interested in that. Now, because of my love with California and the land, I arranged a meeting with Fred Simpich, who was the president of Oceanic. And this is a conversation I'll never forget, because I went in there and I told him I was interested in real estate and read about Oceanic Properties. And he said one line, he says, we're thinking of buying a piece of property on the mainland. I said, okay. I said, East Coast or West Coast? He said, West Coast. I said, Northern California, Southern California? He said, Northern California. I said, commercial or residential? He said, residential. I said, first homes or second homes? He said, second home. I said, second homes on the coast north of San Francisco. He said, that's right. I said, wouldn't be a big ranch with a lot of hedgerows on it up by the Wallowa River, is it? So in less than 20 questions, I had zeroed in on the exact piece of property that he was thinking about buying. And so then he ushered me into Al Boeke's office, and Al wanted to do a little test. He says, well, what in the world can a Stanford business school student add to land development, which is really comprised of architects, land planners, etc. So I gave him an earful, and he says, you passed. And so came back and was the only student in my class without a job, because I was still waiting to try and hear from Oceanic Properties. I did turn down a great job offer from Bell Helicopter, which is twice the pay that Fred and Al ended up offering. And I took a summer job in Palo Alto with a company called Hare, Brewer & Kelly. And we did a consulting job with the Kent family about the sea drift. And at that time, our recommendation was not to just chop up all the lots on right on the coast and sell them off, because it was going to diminish the value and create too much density in sea drift. They didn't take our advice, but it had opened my eyes as to what cluster housing and development really meant versus just cutting out a bunch of lots looking like stamps right on the edge of the cliff. Long story short, I finally got the call in July of 1963 that I was going to be hired. So I became the first Oceanic employee in 1963. And I did some other work for them, but the main concentration was the Sea Ranch. And my first real exposure to the ranch was to a gentleman by the name of Page Meyer. And Page was the broker who knew the Olson family. And he had a little second-story walk-up back office down on Union Street. And so I went in there, immediately made friends with Page because he knew what was about to happen or hoped for would happen. And he brought me up and we went over the Annapolis Road to the Wallowa River. He got out of the car and started walking right down the river. I said, Page, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to show you why this ranch is so important. And he was right. It was because of the water of the Wallowa River that made this project possible. We invested, Oceanic had me investigate other projects up and down the coast, clear down the San Mateo coast, etc. And I only had to go in there and ask one question about development. That was, where was your water coming from? And they would say, well, we'll sink wells, etc., etc. Well, sinking wells is not going to be enough to promote any development. So, long story short, in '63, we started the planning in San Francisco, and I was introduced to an august group of land planners and architects whose names at the time I didn't know, but some of whom became fast friends. And it was obviously Al was in control and doing an excellent job. Larry Halpern, and he had a gentleman named for him, working for him by the name of Dick Reynolds, who did some fantastic wind studies up here, in and around the hedgerows, up on the hills, down in the meadows, and there were pieces of art he made. I'm not sure if he could ever capture those, but they were magnificent studies. And Ashurst started chipping in, and Moreland and Turnbull and Whitaker, especially with the emphasis on Bill Turnbull. And so the planning began and unfolded. And about that time, then I started meeting with Reverdy. And the planning went on all in the fall of '63, continued into early '64 when the construction all began. And then, in one anecdote about that, Reverdy, if you know it or not, crafted the Sonoma County condominium zoning laws. Because there were no condominium zoning laws in Sonoma County. And so Reverdy drafted that because the whole Sea Ranch was a condominium. But we were trying to sell the supervisors and some of the planning people, and we brought them over in a twin engine airplane and landed up at the Wallowa Airport. And everybody had a great day. And then I remember I wasn't flying at that time, and I sat in the co-pilot seat and looked at the pilot, and I'd flown that kind of airplane, and he just sat there and sat there and sat there, and I knew what he was thinking, and that was, I have all these guys in the back of the plane, am I really going to be able to clear that 70-foot tree at the runway? And he waited, finally he just stepped on the brakes, gave the engine full throttle, and finally it off. We cleared those trees by at least 20 or 30 feet. But it reminded me that maybe we should really think about trying to get an airport here at the Sea Ranch. And a side note to that, I rented an airplane later and flew over to the nut tree and sat there and counted the number of planes leaving and landing and talked to the pilots to try and find out whether there'd really be any significant interest from the pilots in buying at the Sea Ranch. And it sounded more like they wanted to buy lunch rather than buy a lot. They were always looking for places to fly, but not necessarily to buy. So in the spring of '65, and it seemed like an eternity because we'd gone through 2 years of planning, 2 years of building, and we were about ready to try and start selling, see if the market would accept what had been conceived of. And in in today's times period, 2 years would be in a flash. Back then, it was a little bit longer, but Reverdy had, again, worked with the state, and again, this concept was all new because we were starting with phase 1 and phase 2, which really amounted to only selling 50 lots, and that was all we had to sell. But we were thinking maybe 2,500 lots in the years to come. So we got a pink slip to take deposits, and I think the Edgertons were some of the first people to put down $500 and buy up a lot. And then 3 or 4 months later, we finally got the white slip to start selling properties. And at that time, there was things to be seen and things that were not seen. We had the little store and a bar, and the sales office was really where the post office was. We had maybe a 6 by 8 foot area with a little replica of those first 50 lots, and that was it. And then, of course, we had a couple of Ashurst houses, and we had the condos, and we had the rec center. And the planners had done a great job about what we could do with the ranch. But as Reverdy could attest, the only thing that we could guarantee were 50 lots. So there was several things missing. As an example, there was no long-term financing available. I eventually got a Farmers Life Insurance Company to commit some long-term financing because we didn't have security and we didn't have a fire department. I fixed that by buying a fire truck from the city of Rodeo for $4,500 and driving it up here. And we had our first volunteer fire department every couple of weeks, and we'd play firemen and go out and hook up the truck to one of the fire hydrants to see if there was actually water, see if the truck actually worked and pumps, and we'd spray water all over the grass. So it was catch as catch can, and I spent a lot of time with Reverdy because, as I said, he got it through the California Real Estate Department, he got it through Sonoma, and I amassed a number of titles that were unseen at the time. I think my signature's on the original CC&Rs for the ranch. I think I was president of the water company. It was only one person, really. It was on the Sea Ranch Association, Homeowners Association, and Homeowners Association for the condominiums. And I put together budgets for that, and we could imagine that the budgets then that I guessed at were probably a 100th or 1,000th of what they are now. But I was newly married. I have a much prettier and nicer wife with me now, my second wife, but my first wife and I moved up, and we moved into condominium unit number 10. And we moved in there, and the first night we were there were boxes every place, and we went to bed, and about 2 minutes after we got in bed, the door slammed open, the lights went on, and Ed and Alice Olson walked in for a shivaree with Matt Sylvia and about 20 other people. So for an hour and a half, I served drinks in my nightshirt and kind of really 10 down there. So the people that we amassed to try and breathe life into the project was not as august as the group of architects and land planners. The bartender was my former postman at Sausalito. He had a friend who from Santa Rosa who became the chef. My wife became a salesman. A buddy I'd flown with in the Marine Corps, Kit Kane, became a salesman. And then probably the most illustrious salesman of all time to join the Sea Ranch early in the game was a gentleman by the name of Snap Binker. And I don't know if any of you ever met Snap, but he was about 6'2", bald as a billiard ball and as shiny as a billiard ball. And somebody would walk into that little sales office, wanting to know where Jenner was, or where Mendocino was, or where the bathroom was. He'd walk up to him, look down on him, and say, "Baker's my name." Snap, Baker. Whether to back off or run or what. He became a terrific salesman. So we opened up and started selling off the pink slip. Reverdy mentioned Marion Conrad. Reverdy didn't mention it, but I think he and I are in a picture in Sports Illustrated tracing across the hills that ended up because of Marion's effort, and how she ever convinced Sports Illustrated that walking across the hills in the Sea Ranch was part of sports. I don't know, but she did it. We sold, it took us about a year, and we sold out the first 50 lots. And it was about a lot a week, but as I said, there was more people interested in understanding where Jenner was and Mendocino was, or where the bathroom was, than there was in buying lots. We only had maybe 10 or 15 minutes to try and get somebody to part with $10,000 or $15,000 at that time. And we couldn't promise them that the plan was going to be executed. The only thing we could really sell was the 50 lots that we had. Later on, another incident I'd like to tell on Reverdy, we did get into Unit 4, or 3 or 4, whatever it was. We're up in the hills. And I used to have a blue 1942 Willys Jeep that I would ride around in, and I would also take people out onto their lots and tell them to stand up. And you're standing in your bedroom or your living room, look out over the coast, and it's going to be great. Well, Reverdy and I took that old blue Jeep over to where they were planning the new units up in the hills, and we looked over the hill, and Reverdy and I looked at each other, and it was just a bulldozed road going down the hill, and I said, "Should we go?" And Reverdy says, "Yes." So about halfway down, Reverdy says, "I think you better put it in low." And I looked at Reverdy. He was dressed in a magnificent silk tie, a beautiful jacket, nice clean pressed trousers, tasselled loafers. And halfway down, he said, "Emmett, I think you better put it in low." And I said, "Reverdy, I got it in low. I have the emergency brake on." And we're still going. The long story short, we ended up down the bottom of the hill in a bog, and he's sloshing around up to his knees in mud, dirt all over that pretty jacket. And we had to call a bulldozer. The bulldozer came up and says, "Well, I'm either going to get you out of there or take the front end out, one or the other." Those were some of the early days, and we were competing with Lake Tahoe, and of course Incline Village was going full bore. Timber Cove was a different kind of operation, but it was selling. Pajaro Dunes down in south of Palo Alto was going full bore. So we had to find a niche, and I tried to create a destination area. One thing that I regret that never happened was there was a gentleman by the name of Don Denham who owns Heritage House. And I had multiple meetings with Don, and he was convinced that a lodge could be built. Remember, we didn't have a lodge at that time. All we had was a little bar and a restaurant. And Don wanted to build Heritage House number 2 here. And I think that would have made a significant difference in creating a destination area and creating the kind of clientele that we have, the people we have living here at the ranch now. But that didn't happen. Another name who won't appear in the record books in any way was a gentleman, now I'm having a difficult time remembering, who designed the links. The links were originally going to be much further south than they are now. And what's that? Yeah, the designer now was different than the person that we initially engaged because it was put off for a number of years. But we did get the airport in, did not get done, and we got the fire truck, and we got 50 lots sold, and we got the new subdivisions going. And so I'll wrap up, but if there was ever a wall of fame to be attributed to the people who really made the ranch happen, turned from an idea into actual, well-known, worldwide known development, my 3 nominations would be Reverdy for creating the legal framework that really made us breathe, Bill Turnbull, who was so successful as an architect, and Matty Silva for building. The rest of us were supporters to those 3 guys who really made it happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for your stories. Good stories, thank you. Remember, these guys were only in their 20s and they were doing all this. Before we go on to Diane, we're going to just back for a minute to Russ Ohlson. He's got a couple more stories he felt we could pass on to you.
I don't know whether you can hear me now or not, but I think so. This is back during the war. One night my father was very restless. He walked up here on top of the first ridge. There used to be a tank house up there. He looked out on the ocean, and as far as he could see, were a line of ships. Once in a while, you'd see a big flash. Who knows what happened? Okay, now here's one that when I was little, I was 5, 6 years old or something. I looked out here in the ocean one morning, and I said to my mother, "What's that fishing boat doing out here this time of year?" It was winter and the ocean was rough. Well, we're standing there looking out the window. This fishing boat disappeared. We called it in Hamilton Field. Right from out over the ocean comes a bomber. Up the coast comes a blimp. As far as we know, the soldier boys that came by twice a day said that fishing boat, sub, whatever you want to call it, was sunk off of Shelter Cove. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Diane Boeke was now going to share stories that she knows from her own memory and some that she's heard from Al over the years. So Diane, start with how you first got into the mix with Castle Cooke.
First off, thank you, Susan. First off, I am so glad that this is being recorded because some of these stories that we've heard, you know, Emmett's presentation really are terrific and should be saved forever. My contribution, and I'm not very good at this, is to relate my history in Honolulu as an employee of Castle Cooke first and then Oceanic Properties. In addition, I'd like to read some excerpts of some written reflections of Al's following the planning process of the ranch, which may be a little bit mundane and uninteresting to a lot of people, but nevertheless it shows the scope of depth that went into the planning of this place. I was an observer and in a supporting way a participator in some of the events leading to how a Hawaiian Big Five company with major sugar and shipping among other island-based agricultural interests, acquired and subsequently developed a sizable Northern California property. In the mid-50s, I joined Castle Cooke in its public relations department. I then later moved over as secretary to Frederick Simpage, who was the vice president of Castle Cooke at the time, responsible for research and development of new projects. Then following the early 60s merger of Dole Corporation into Castle Cooke and its later creation of the land development subsidiary Oceanic Properties, of which Mr. Simpage became president, I followed him as his secretary and eventually was Oceanic's assistant corporate secretary. After the war, the economy in Hawaii, due to growing labor issues and gradual environmental concerns, changed from that of pineapple and sugar production, its main elements, to that of tourism. The result was that in the mid-50s, Dole Corporation began to close down their Lanai Island and 3,000-acre Oahu pineapple production and relocate it to the Philippines. At the same time, Castle Cooke was facing growing environmental pressures concerning their sugar plantations on Oahu and the Big Island. Both firms had issues as to what to do with the land destined to be removed from pineapple for Dole, and for Castle Cooke, ultimate vacated sugar acreage. Also at the time, the housing situation on Oahu was becoming critical due to a rapidly increasing population. Thus, the two companies decided to merge into one, Castle Cooke. And then the new Castle Cooke formed a subsidiary, Oceanic Properties, to be responsible for the planning and development of the two companies' combined properties. The first assignment for Oceanic, under the direction of Al, who was brought from the mainland to be its vice president, director of planning, was the planning and development of the former 3,000-acre Dole Oahu property located north of Pearl Harbor into Mililani Town, a fully new first hometown, now boasting a population of 50,000 residents. Also underway at the time were plans for resort development on the Lanai, as well as residential development on vacated sugar land on the Big Island of Hawaii. Oceanic's charter also was to seek, initiate, and complete other development projects. A memorial park in the Philippines, a residential subdivision on the island of Tahiti, a medical building in Los Angeles, a high-rise residential condominium in downtown Honolulu, the residential subdivision on the Big Island, and a major redevelopment of the downtown block where the Castle Cooke office building was located, was planned and completed. I believe it was the first successfully completed co-op business block development in the nation. It also became the linchpin for the eventual redevelopment of downtown Honolulu. What led Al to the Del Mar Ranch was during an unsuccessful property research for a developable new town in the Bay Area. And that is essentially my story and my part of it. Now on to Al's. Following his initial discovery and the early studies of the Del Mar Ranch and its potential as a unique coastal community development opportunity, and with the approval of the Castle Cooke board to go ahead, then Al writes, I gotta find his notes, we were careful not to preconceive solutions, decided that the first order of business was to visit the local county supervisor, who enthusiastically welcomed our sensitive vision for easing people gently into the landscape. He responded positively to the notion of a partnership with a developer keeping its promises and doing the right thing. The next weeks were spent interviewing and hiring a baker's dozen of appropriate professional consultants. With consultants on board, we began close to 1 year of feasibility, viability, ecological, and design studies that considered everything: design, engineering, utilities, incremental construction schedule, cash flow, marketing, community association, public relations, advertising, staffing, landscape, architecture, and government approvals. Said differently, we needed to answer the question, is the Del Mar Ranch a viable site for the 20 to 30 year development and marketing of a new community? Then more questions. We then created the opportunity to option 5,200 acres for a 1-year planning period, and upon finding community feasibility, then purchased the land over a 7-year period of land release takedowns. The dynamic site was a separate and distinct 5,200 acre parcel, 3.5 hours from city and 2 hours from suburbia. It was naturally beautiful, hardy, but not harsh, physically adaptable to community use. Local old-timers confirmed the rumor of a banana belt. The easterly river promised domestic water. Costly forest cleaning and thinning would be required to prevent fire and return it to a thriving forest. We should immediately remove the sheep from the ocean terrace for natural regeneration of the landscape and wildlife. We were impressed by the scattered historic buildings that visually enriched the site and could be used synthetically. An existing town, Wallala, that with major new community support could grow commercially and provide daily conveniences and services. The site seemed ideal for a quiet, private, meditative, non-resort new community. While at first glance its remoteness suggested a problem, a positive sales program could make that an advantage over the years of second home development, naturally evolving to first, or at least both. In fact, wouldn't these factors automatically filter potential buyers to those with the eyes that see, understand, and with the emotional commitment produce perfect candidates for a self-governing private community, at least as much as the state laws allow? Now I've got to find some more. Here we go. I need some more. Because of the 1/2 to 1 mile narrowness of the ocean terrace, avoid the use of a 10-mile intrusive collector in favor of Highway 1 with spaced access to hedgerow-separated enclaves. Maintain a green site to dominate modest man-made structures. Design all home sites to avoid substantial grading and forbid padding. Aim advertising and sales at the school teacher, artist, author, builder, and other just plain folks who perceive the wonder of the site and understand the opportunity for local voluntary stewardship and control. Changing to another note. Here. Oh, very good. Huh. Oh, there it is. Okay. Al continues, houses would not have any minimum size or cost. They would only have something of an architectural quality that would recede into the landscape. 50% of the land would be left open as common. We had plans for the forest, the grasslands, the existing swales, the eroding bluff edge, the sand dunes, a regional park, water distribution, including tanks, storage along the ridge, septic gas and electric, TV, no guns on the city ranch, how to handle safety on Highway 1 by improving it which the state did not allow, even though we would be paying for it. Whether to keep the existing power electric line that parallels the highway, and we had no choice but to keep it. What to do about the seals to protect them, what kind of roads we would have, i.e., they would look as though they were painted on the land, they would not have curbs and gutters, which we had a difficult process with the county on that, and then had to guarantee them. And we never had to go in to put in curbs and gutters for erosion reasons. Trails, where the fault line was, whether that was a problem. There was the notion that we should take the land between any pair of hedgerows and call that a planning unit or a neighborhood, and that the roads would be in a T pattern with the head of the T by the highway and the end of the leg towards the ocean for access, and that there would be no Chinese wall for views. As it turns out, we varied from that in order to have more variety, which was dictated as well by the changing distance of spacing of the hedgerows. We were very strong about forest houses not standing out in front of the forest like an urban wall, but peeking subtly through the forest. One of the members of the planning group literally broke his sword over a period of weeks about wanting desperately to have fences tying all of the houses together, as in the demonstration houses along all residential roads. Most of the rest of us were on the other side of, it's Al Wright's, pardon the expression, fence. And he said, I ultimately decided no, let's stop talking about this. We can't do it for the practical reason we're building lots on which people will build custom houses with design committee approval, but they won't be built in any consecutive order or pattern. So there's no way that you can build a fence here or there and not have the wind knock it down and tie it to the fence of the house next door. Now I'm going back to that. We invented the term visible from neighboring property to aid the design committee and create an incentive for neat and tidy neighborhoods free of, quote, domestic debris, end quote, and excessive automobiles. Create spaced community centers, preserving existing structures as the first building blocks. Implement the notion of devoting 50% of the land to commons immediately adjacent to all lots and avoiding the Chinese wall between homes and ocean. Establish undivided interest in the commons for all members without property line fences, thus respecting the rural site and unifying the community. Limit landscape visible from neighboring property to indigenous species with 6-foot fenced enclosures allowed for vegetable, entry, or semi-limited gardens. Create a members association for governance and maintenance with annually elected board establishing policy, physical integrity, budget, and fees. In other words, the privilege of establishing place and paying our own way. Create professional design review that is viable, member helpful, and that will uniquely hold up in court. Create a professional association staff with developer subsidized costs until the member association becomes viable based upon fees. Create CC&Rs as protections for and from each other, avoiding negative do's and don'ts. In fact, one might say a community constitution. Encourage voluntary creativity in social affinity groups such as bridal, walking and bike trails, theater, art, library, discussion groups of all kinds, hobbies, and a motivated membership. Stage 1 would be in the area of Byler and Black Point, and it would proceed in an orderly way from the south to the north, so that we would be developing and selling as we extend along water, electrical, septic roads, all of the infrastructure lines. Not leapfrog from place to place, leaving blank spots behind. Excuse me. After a dozen months, we began construction and sales with the first stage of the lodge, the 10-unit condo, 7 demonstration houses, the first swim recreation facility, the highway signature marker building, post office, the landing strip, the corporation building, the first units of meadow and upland lots. We provided a fire engine, a TV tower, cable, normal roads, and underground utilities. Unbelievably, in the 1960s, outright, metal lot prices were $6,000 to $10,000, 2-bedroom condos and houses at $25,000, 3-bedroom and each of the 5-point ocean lots at $35,000. Okay. Now this is back to me. So that's the end of Al's presentation. Okay. Now finally, I have 3 brief stories to tell that I remember very clearly. One of them was regarding the water situation at the Sea Ranch. I remember Al saying that well into the year of study, one day he was pacing in his Honolulu office wondering what could likely be a deal breaker and couldn't think of anything except possibly water. The initial hydrology report indicated there was plenty of water on the ocean terrace with a density for 1 unit per acre on the 5,200 acre parcel. To be sure, Al decided to have it force pumped by another hydrologist who discovered the original hydrology report was absolutely wrong. They then immediately negotiated the purchase of land, now known as the hotspot, from Walla Redwoods to provide essential access to the river. Also, the 300-acre Walla Point Park exists today because early in the negotiations with the county wanted a parking lot with porta potty and a trail to the coast every 1/2 mile along Highway 1 to provide public access. Oceanic deeded the 300 acres to the county for a park to eliminate that requirement in the plan. If it hadn't been agreed upon, Oceanic was prepared to walk away from the project. Finally, a personal historic footnote. There's been the mention of Walter Frick, the very successful Bay Area businessman who owned the Del Mar Ranch in the early 1900s, which was eventually sold to the Ohlson family in the early 40s. Mr. Frick also happened to have owned 15,000 acres of land on Mount Diablo. In 1956, the Black Hawk Ranch, a sizable portion of that land, was purchased by Castle Cooke from Mr. Frick's heirs and held it until 1964, and then it was sold to someone else. I visited that property in the late 50s on an assignment from Castle Cooke as the editor of the Castle Cooke Company newsletter. That's it.
Thank you, Diana. Our last speaker is really 2 speakers, and it's a husband and wife, Al and Diana Edgerton, and they bought when this was just a dream, a wish. And I find it amazing that they bought to begin with, and that after all these years, they're still coming back. And we want to know what drew them here to begin with and what keeps them coming back.
We're still here. Thank you, Diane. Excuse me. I grew up in La Jolla down in Southern California in the early 30s and 40s. It was wide open, hillsides and beaches, diving for abalone, surfing and swimming. By 1964, I was married and living in the Bay Area, married to my wife, Diana. We would take weekend trips down to Carmel, up the coast to Mendocino, to Heritage House, other places. We had a reservation at Harbor House in Elk for a long weekend in August. And instead of driving up 101, coming down the Navarro River to the Mendocino coast, we came up Highway 1 and came across the Sea Branch. And that was the end of August, I think, in '64. They were opening the Ashurst houses being opened, and we stopped to look at them. So we went through the Ashurst houses and got the concept of 50% of the land being in commons. And going up and down the coast of Mendocino, we'd find lovely areas, but you never knew what was going to be next door if you were thinking of buying something. It might be a wrecking yard, or who knew what might move in next door. And here they had the concept of 10 miles of coastline. They were going to have recreational facilities. There would be security. And it just was a wonderful concept to me. And having grown up with open spaces that were uncrowded before World War II came along in Southern California, it was just a magical area. And so I was very, very keen on it. So we cut our weekend short up at the Heritage House, left on Monday, came down, found a salesman after that weekend by the name of Carter, and looked for something. We didn't want to be on the bluff because we had one small child. My wife was pregnant with our second, and the bluff area was not the keen area for me, and having grown up in a Southern California beach town, I knew the ravages of salt spray living next to the ocean. So we wanted to be up on the hillside. The lots up there were all right, but expensive, and I looked further north. I was looking for a knoll that would look out. I love that northern coast view, and I wanted to find something where you could get the view north and south. So I looked for lots at the end of the knoll, and we took off with a topographical map. Crow's Nest was paved as far as the little roundy round with a tree just north of the Moonraker. And the salesman and Diana and I started off through the dirt road that became Crow's Nest. And the first two lots on the knoll were at what is now Pine Tree Close, and they both had names on them. And then we proceed on up to what was labeled to be Compass Close. There was no road there yet, just the Crow's Nest Road. And there were two lots down there on the knoll. The one on the northern exposure had a name on it, and the one at the southern exposure didn't. So we walked down to that, and it was lovely level land. We could look north and look south. Lots of trees in front. From up above, we could look down and see Black Point. So that was the lot we selected, and we put our name down. We couldn't buy it at the time because it hadn't cleared the county or the state subdivision map, but we were allowed to put a deposit down. They were willing to take some money for that and take our name. So we did that, and never regretted it.
Oh. My husband. Anyway, the sales office was a small part of the current lodge with a restaurant and store, no cypress trees, very bare. We learned the office had officially opened July 4th, just 6 weeks earlier, with great fanfare and a large tent which managed to hold steady despite the gale winds. The units in Condominium 1 and the Ingleneck Ashurst houses were for sale. The largest of the latter, with 3 bedrooms, had a price tag of $42,000. For that amount, you could buy a very good house in the Bay Area. The whole point beyond Black Point Beach, one lot, could be purchased for $25,000 and would be named for the owner. The ultimate owner of the house, the lot and house, subsequently sold,
and moved up to the hillside as trespassers would come right up to their windows and peer inside. We were told the meadow north of Black Point in the future would have some kind of commercial development. Unit 31 across the highway on the hillside above the current lodge and condos was scheduled for more condos, as was Shepherd's Knoll near the airport. Since Oceanic owned all the land not subdivided and only a small number of lots had been sold, they managed the association. Our dues would be $15 per month. There were 2 young salesmen, one from Montana, Texas, named Carter, and Kit Kane, who turned out to be a friend of Emmett's, a lawyer. We were not interested. Well, he was teaching at a boarding school at Stillwater Cove. He was moonlighting, doing sales on the side. So, let's see. I must say, Moonraker, when they put in the road, there wasn't a road down to the 2 lots. The grader came down and pushed all of the earth onto the north lot. So suddenly our lot was lower. So the moral was, don't ever pick out a lot until the road is in. I don't care where that is. Everyone wanted to buy, and we contacted an architect, and he designed a lovely little house for us. And then we put it up to bid, and it came in at 3 times our budget and the cost as it was. So we started thinking, what are we going to do now? Because everybody wanted to build, and they were up there, and there were a couple of prefabs that were put up, and the association really didn't like that much. So finally, Bill Turnbull and Charles Moore and Snap Thinker got together, and they
Matt Sylvia.
and Matt's, well, he built them, but came together, and Bill and Charles Moore, they designed a house that was aesthetically complementary to the condominiums and the Ashurst houses, and it turned out to be a barn. My grandfather had been an architect in Chicago, and he'd grown up in Weathersfield, Vermont, on Weathersfield Bow, a large farm running merino sheep. And in those days, well, in fact, even now, the barns are connected to the houses because of the winter snow. So he had a lot of time playing in barns. And he loved 2-story living rooms. And when the model was built down by Moonraker, we went in and we just fell in love with this, with a 2-story living room with the doors that open looking down on whatever it was. So we were just so enthusiastic. However, the problem was that the association at this point had decided that they would sell the lot and a bigger barn as a combo. So since we already had our lot, we were last in line. So we waited, and I'll let Al take over because there were refinements that were made.
Well, when you worked with Matt Sylvia, number one, you were patient because it took time with Matt. But we were always going to get our house built, and it was always going to be built, but there were more and more that said they were selling them, and so I kept thinking, well, they're going to improve on their abilities and their planning as they build this. And eventually they got around to our house, and it was mostly completed, which was a continuing process. We came up when Thanksgiving with the children and the fireplace we wanted a rock fireplace, and the rocks were all over the floor in the front room by the living room, but we had Thanksgiving there, and that was very wonderful for us. We came up another time, and the 2 ceiling panels by the fireplace had been sheetrocked, which looked great. So I went up to see Matt. When I went up to see Matt, I always went in the morning because that's when he got his crew together. And otherwise, you didn't know where he was on the ranch, or if it was a calm day, he was out in his boat fishing. And I asked him about the sheetrock. He said, "Oh, was that done in your house?" He said, "That was supposed to be down somewhere else." So I offered to pay for it. He wouldn't take any money. He said, "No," I said, "That's our mistake. That's our mistake." So then we wanted our bedroom wall sheetrock, and we contacted him again. So we came up sometime after it was supposed to be done. Well, the scaffolding was in the bedroom, this big iron scaffolding, and we rolled around that to get into bed. The next time we kept the sheetrocking had been done, but the scaffolding was still there. So I went up to see Maddie and said, was that where that is? Now eventually that left and we got our bedroom back again. But it was, there were just lots of wonderful memories. We looked south and we could see that the grass would grow up during the summer across the meadow and up the hillsides and up to what is now Unit 31 and clear up to the forest edge. And we could see all of that blowing in the wind, and it was lovely. It was like the ocean waves, only it was the grass and the hillsides. Of course, they planted trees after a while, and then they built houses, and all of that disappeared, and the trees on Pine Tree Close grew up. So we don't have that view anymore, but it was a beautiful thing. And we'd go there to fly kites with our children, and the grass was taller than our youngest child at that time. But it's a neat memory to have, and we enjoyed it so much.
We could see the original barn from our house. We looked down on it, and last year something was going on, and suddenly, it was getting barer and barer and barer, and so we thought, So we called Lisa Scott, who was director of the design committee, and said, what's going on? And she said, well, there's a young architect who lives next door to that barn. His family has owned that, and he worked for Bill Turnbull at one time. And he's working with the new owners to completely renovate this barn. And so we thought, I called the young man, and he came up, and he looked at our house, but wait a minute, I'm getting ahead of myself. Lisa arranged to have a party once it was all completed. And all of the barn owners were invited, and Snap Baker was there, Lisa Scott, and of course the new owners. They were very generous in doing this. And after I asked the young architect to come up to our barn and see it, and when he came, he said that he'd had a terrible time with the design committee because he wanted to enlarge the barns by 3 inches on the walls for insulation. And the design committee wasn't sure about this at all because the barns are, in fact, friends of ours stayed at our barn, and they wanted to buy the plans from Bill because they were going to build something up at Twainhart. And Bill said, the barns stay on the ranch. That's where they stay. But anyway, the young man came up to our barn and he looked at it. He said, it's a whole new world up here on the hillside compared to down on the meadows and in the bluffs and whatever it is. And we thought, that's the story of Sea Ranch. And we've seen it with the potlucks that were going on, the different units that got together. We did too. Is that every area of this Sea Ranch has a story, and you've heard some of our stories, and it's all the people that have come together. We were so fortunate in having as neighbors the Rands, Gene and Bill Rand. He had been an executive with the land company in Southern California, and he and Gene retired up here, and he eventually became the first community manager after Oceanic left. Joanne McLaughlin, she was an early person, and she came to Bill and said, I'd really like to start a newspaper for just sea ranchers. And Bill said, it's got to be the whole coast. It's got to match the Independent Coast Observer. Bill always hoped he'd live long enough where the freeway would go around Novato. Before that, it was red lights, a slog on Thanksgiving weekend going back or whatever it is, but he did. That was followed by Pat and Johnny Cairns. He was a senior captain with one of the big airlines, and he flew from San Francisco to Seattle. And he said, where is this place? He looked down at the land where there's no fog. And they found out it was Sea Ranch. They came up and rented a house for a while to see how it worked. And eventually, when the Rands left, the Cairns bought the Rands house. And we were, I think, we've been part-timers, as the saying goes, even though we've been here a long time. But we so appreciate and admire and salute all of the people, just like the Rands and the Cairns who came and lived here and were part of the Redwoods and all the different organizations that have been built up through volunteers giving selfishly and time and everything else to keep all of this magic dream really take place. Harry Lindstrom is head of the archives, and he's been asking people to write down their memories or say how they found Sea Ranch and write that down and turn it in so that can be part of the history. So Al and I did, and we turned it in the 1st of January, of last year. Then with this panel coming up, and about 4 weeks ago, Al was going through a drawer, and out popped this little postcard. It's been there for I don't know how many years, but it was a picture we must have gotten, a postcard, of the Sea Ranch store sales office, and you can see the pens from the Ohlsons, and you can see a few trucks and the ocean behind. And I said, Al, we've got to share this. We've got to share this, because this is what it looked like when we walked in to buy our lot. And so we ran around. I went down to the local coffee plus shop and pulled together what we'd written down and got a couple of photographs of our lot and then whatever. And so in the end, we have a little booklet that we'd like to give you, particularly for the postcard that's on the cover. It shows the little beginnings of the lodge, the pens from the Ohlson's Ranch, and it was 1964, and that was the beginning of the Sea Ranch. So they're free of charge. This is our contribution to all of you in what you've done, and I just put them up here. And if you come up and take one at your leisure, and if I don't have enough, Harry Lindstrom said that he would take your name and he would see, because Harry has a disc of the whole thing. And I must confess that in the booklet you're getting, I misspelled Halpern. Can you believe that? So I spent time typing up and pasting in a little, but it's been corrected in the disc. So Al will help me out.
I wanted to say, there's one more thing in the changing environment here. The beaches and driftwood, the beaches used to be filled with driftwood, and that has disappeared. And we'd go down to the beach and
Abalone shells.
yeah, abalone shells and driftwood, but things would be built down on the beach out of the driftwood, and it would be wonderful to go down there and see it. Architects and builders started coming down to collect it, to take it back up to building sites. But the creek beds would be filled with it, and that's disappeared with the logging. I was happy to see a picture recently of construction on the beach, and I hope it's a new picture, maybe it's an old picture. Somebody built something out of driftwood down there, great big towering driftwood. But the environment changes. There are more of us living lightly on the land now, and there's an accumulation of more assets, and there's more community concern with loss of assets, so we're concerned about fire, and we're living up and mowing down and opening things up, and what used to be maybe a hike in the wilderness is more like a walk in the park. But I think we've preserved very well the concept of what was asked for originally here. And you may be a biologist or a geologist or just hemmed in by urban living, and you come up here, and a day like today you can walk along the bluff and look out and just enjoy the land.
These are our tribal historians. They're the keeper of our history. And every one of them has a story. And let's give them all a round. tons of them. You will need to come up and get, we have a microphone here. Somebody can move one of the microphone, or you can take one of these. If anybody has any specific questions, we can take a few questions. If you don't, you're just keepers of the history, and you don't need to pass it on. Here you go. Would you give your name, please?
I'm Tom Priest, and I'm probably here because I'm a botch squasher. You guys are an opportunity for me, because I want to ask about that water development issue. Mystery to me is not the Sea Ranch, but the neighbors to the Sea Ranch. I understand from, I think it's Mr. Fowler who owns our water company, that when he was getting reapproved for the well down the stream, he discovered, much to his shock, there was no record of how the Baker property ever got connected to the water company. And we asked the Baker family how that happened. They said, I forgot Mr. Baker's name. The legendary Mr. Baker said, Jay said never to talk about how that water hookup happened. So should any of you know, that's one question. The other issue is the house that sits up above the posh, which is now also connected to the water. It clearly was built in the 50s, and yet I thought there was a general failure of wells. Was there a well at the time, and do you know?
Does anybody want to take that one? Otherwise, I'll answer it. That property up there is Christensen property.
Yeah.
And when that's one of the 3 areas where there are springs along the ranch. In fact, that's actually why historically there were 3 areas of development. This one down here, the one in the middle of the ranch where the Nipspangle barn is, and down at Black Point. And so that's fed by the water that would have come down by Black Point. And the reason why there's that house there was an earlier Christensen house. It was a 2-story house that's not there anymore. It burned. But that house was built in the 50s. And then in the 60s, when Sea Ranch became Sea Ranch, and the Posh Squash Garden people wanted to put in the garden, and it had to be just off the edge of Sea Ranch, because God knows it's not indigenous plantings. And so in order to water the Posh Squash Garden, the Posh Squashers made a deal with the Christensens to link into their water supply. And so that water supply